Our next speaker is another good friend of mine. He's an accomplished Toastmaster, former chair of the Libertarian Party, candidate for governor of the state of Indiana. We have Indiana on our brains here, Pennsylvania, and an author. He has a booth outside called Atlas Snubbed, and his book is a parody sequel on Ayn Rand's Atlas Shrugged. Please welcome Ken Krawchuk.
Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank Lou Jasikoff and all the Restoring Freedoms people here for staging this event. It's a pleasure to be here. But I have a problem. I'm not really sure what to say. Now, ostensibly, I'm here to talk about my new book, Atlas Snubbed. As Lou said, it's a parody sequel to Atlas Shrugged. But since I only have so much time, let me ask you folk a few questions. Let me see, how many of you are fans of fiction? Show of hands? Okay, a number of you. How many of you like science fiction? There you go. Love some science fiction. How about love stories? Who likes a love story? We got a bunch of people. Somebody's rather adamant about it. Good news, I got all of that right here. How many of you have read Atlas Shrugged, Ayn Rand's book? Boy, I'm in the right room, aren't I? Looks like most all of you. How many of you enjoyed it? Maybe I should ask the opposite. How many didn't enjoy it? Boy, I am in the right room. Because if you like Atlas Shrugged, and you like fiction, science fiction, and love stories, I got just what you're looking for here. Now let me narrow it down a little further. Let me ask some political questions, and pardon me for getting personal here. How many would count themselves as conservative? A few. How about liberals? Uh-oh, this microphone must have stopped working. Liberals? No, I don't see any. Okay. Any libertarians? Good, good. I can see I'm right in the right place. Any objectivists? Oh, we have one objectivist. Well, I'm sorry, I don't think I have anything for you. Any lawyers? Good, no lawyers. I can skip that whole part. Any philosophers? No, there's a couple philosophers out there. Okay, I think I got a good idea. I can see, I have something here for virtually all of you to be enjoying. Let me ask something about current events, though. How many of you are concerned about the national debt? Yeah, just about everybody. How many of you are concerned about the value of our money, the deteriorating value of our cash? Yeah, I'm in the right place. How many of you are concerned for the plight of the poor? Okay, good, good, we got it all there. All right, I think I got it now. So what I'd like to do is focus on two areas. First of all, I'd like to talk about my book as a book, and then I'd like to talk about some of the key messages of the book based upon the questions that we just went through. So let me start off from the very top. The book, Atlas Snubbed. Why did I write it? I wrote it because I loved Atlas Shrugged. I think, in my opinion, it's the best novel ever written. And it's a great train story. It's not a huge train fan. Plus, it's a good end-of-the-world thriller, end-of-the-United States thriller. And when I read it, I did not want to see it end. Because it's just the gathering destruction of the United States of America, which mirrors a lot of what's going on in America today. Let me just read one passage from maybe about 20 pages before the end of Atlas Shrugged. There were hunger riots in West Virginia, angry farmers torching government buildings in South Dakota, armed fighting between Georgia and Alabama for the possession of a factory, gangs of raiders attacking the Transcontinental Bridge, a religious civil war raging in California, Oregon, overrun by deserters, and the book ended. It's like, and what happened then? Did they all die happily ever after? She doesn't say. I wanted more. I mentioned it to my wife. I said, somebody should write a sequel. She said, well, why don't you do it? Yeah, right. Well, obviously I did get that far and I did put it together because I wanted more. Have to do it yourself. Second reason I did it was because Ayn Rand is the philosophical matriarch of the Libertarian Party. Her philosophy underpins the philosophy of our political party. Now, I ran for governor of Pennsylvania twice, once in 1998 against Tom Ridge and once in 2002 against Ed Rendell. And as a high-profile libertarian candidate, I found myself in a position where I had to defend Ayn Rand's philosophy to the public at large. I found that some parts of her philosophy are simply indefensible. So what I wanted to do was put together the story of the political solutions to the flaws in objectivism, at least flaws as I saw them, and political solutions as I saw them. And I figured the best way I could do that was in fiction, just taking her characters, the mistakes her characters made, and just keep going forward from there. And believe me, it was an easy target to do. So that's why I did it. Now, let me talk about the book itself. I call it a pastiche parody sequel. And it's unsanctioned, of course. An unsanctioned pastiche parody sequel. And let me talk about each one of those words individually. First of all, it's a pastiche. And there's two meanings of the word pastiche. One is a patchwork, like a quilt put together out of pieces. And this book is definitely a patchwork, because I take different phrases out of Atlas Shrugged and other works of Ayn Rand, and I put them into my book. But I have them coming out of the mouth of a philosophical opposite. So it's pastiche in that it's made up of pieces, not only from Rand's books, but also random pieces. Old cartoons, old movies, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, things like that. There's over 200 references outside the book. You wouldn't notice them unless you have seen the movie or had read that particular book. So it's a pastiche, it's pieces. So given that sort of a collection, especially putting the words of the one character into philosophical opposite's mouth, it's also a parody. But not so much of a ha-ha parody, but more of a parody, where you're wondering just why Ayn Rand would have said some of the things that she said. Because I cite along the lines she laid out and come out with some plainly foreseeable but clearly unintended consequences. So it's a pastiche and it's a parody. But pastiche also has the meaning of something done as a tribute to someone or done in their style. So combining that with a parody, I copied, to the best of my meager ability, a lot of Ayn Rand's stylistic issues. So the book has long speeches in it, not as long as hers. The Galt speech, 33,000 words. My big speech, 5,000 words. A lot easier to take. Plus I break it up a little bit, so it's not as monolithic as some of the things she does. I've also copied her writing style. So there are big paragraphs, long sentences with 2 or 3 semicolons, em dashes, and little parenthetical asides. So it has the same feel as Ayn Rand's book. And I try to ensure that by reading through her book and then going right through mine. So it's a pastiche, it's a parody, but it's a sequel. As I said, one of my main reasons was I wanted more. So I started exactly where Atlas Shrugged ended. End of Atlas Shrugged, Eddie Willers is stranded in the desert aboard the stalled transcontinental comet. My book opens up, Eddie's still on board the comet. Her book ends with this religious civil war raging in California. My book starts, civil war raging in California. Her book stops at the point where they rescue John Galt from the hands of the looters. My book starts where their planes are landing back in the Gulch. It's like that. Those two books are one and the other right on top of them. And they run right on forward from there. And of course it's science fiction too, because Ayn Rand introduced a lot of interesting pieces of science fiction. She has Project X, the disintegrating red, Reardon metal, strong metal which can melt at 4,000 degrees, much, much stronger than steel. Of course she has Galt's motor, runs on atmospheric energy. Voice-actuated devices, which of course today are passé, old news. But I inherited all those things from Atlas Shrugged, and I took it to the next step. So there's a lot of new inventions based upon things that Rand had already laid out. Now when you put all that together, it gets big. Right, real big. I got carried away. It wound up becoming, what's the number? 370,000 words, about half the size of Atlas Shrugged. It's just a little bit too big. So I cut it back to 230,000 words, about 400 pages. And there is a director's cut available where I keep all of the giant version. But generally speaking, I'm distributing only the condensed version just to make life easier. Now when I told a lot of people I was going to put this book together, they were like, Ken, do you know what objectivists are like? Do you know what they're going to say? Do you know what they're going to do? Well, so of course my book is unsanctioned because the odds of receiving official permission to pen a critical sequel to one of the greatest novels ever written, I would say would be about 0. I was worried. So what I did is I actually paid a lawyer good money to investigate the legal landscape. And it turned out I'm on solid ground. Somebody, about 10 years ago, had cleared the legal minefield for me. Somebody wrote a sequel to Gone with the Wind, only it was told from a slave's point of view. The book is called The Wind Done Gone. It was written by a woman having a very interesting coincidence of name, Alice Randall. Not quite Ayn Rand, but close enough. Of course, the Margaret Mitchell people took frenzied exception to the apparent infringement. They took Ms. Randall to court, and after a protracted legal battle, the court ruled that the parody sequel was legal, even though she used pieces right out of Gone with the Wind. In fact, using the same scenes, the same characters, Rhett Butler, Scarlett O'Hara, but it's all told from the slave's point of view. So I thought, okay, I can do that. But I haven't heard anything yet from the objectivists. I've been expecting, the book's been out now for about 3 months, and I haven't heard anything. No dollar signs burned on my lawn or anything like that. So I think I'm on good ground. We'll see. All quiet so far. So that's the book as it is, as looking at it as a book, or as Ayn Rand would say, a book qua book. So let me talk about the message of the book. There are many messages in there. There are political messages, there are social messages, there are objectivist messages, philosophical messages. But let me just focus on the one based upon some of the questions here, plus the fact that I have a limited amount of time. Let's look at our national budget. $3.8 trillion. And our revenues, $2.5 trillion, leaving a gap, a budget deficit of $1.3 trillion. There's a lot of rhetoric about how do we address that. An awful lot of rhetoric. And if we had more time, I would try and solicit some answers from you folk. But I would find answers that nibble around the edges. Oh, take a little bit of money off of NASA. Oh, cut defense spending 10%. Well, that's not going to work, folks. And let me tell you why. Because of that $3.8 trillion budget, about $2.5 trillion of it is the welfare state. Social Security, welfare, Medicare, Medicaid, all those government giveaway programs. So if you eliminated all of the proper functions of government, you could eliminate $1.3 trillion and balance the budget. But all you'd have left is welfare. Welfare consumes all of the budget, all of the revenues, leaving proper functions of government as the deficit. So anything that we're going to do that's meaningful, anything that's going to eliminate the deficit, anything that's going to cut our budget, has to, absolutely has to address the burgeoning welfare state, which grows year after year after year. So what do we do? It's a good question. Let me give just a brief history. Back in the old days, welfare used to be covered by churches, monasteries. But when the Church of England broke away in the medieval times, late medieval period, all of a sudden the government started taking that over with the first poor tax, which got capitalized upon and built upon and became the new poor tax, the workhouses of Dickens's time. In the early United States, governmental charity didn't take much root. Pennsylvania has a few provisions in their constitution, but only for the blind, widows, and a few others. Of course, that's burgeoned out of control too. But generally speaking, it never took hold. In fact, Davy Crockett used to be a congressman, and you may have read an excellent pamphlet he wrote, Not Yours to Give, where he rails against government charity. In fact, he warns us that government should never get involved in charity. And let me just read you the passage that he says. Quote, "The power of collecting and dispersing money at pleasure is the most dangerous power that can be entrusted to man, particularly under our system of collecting revenue by a tariff. Because if you have the right to give to one, you have the right to give to all. And as the Constitution neither defines charity nor stipulates the amount, you are at liberty to give to any and everything which you may believe or profess to believe is a charity, and to any amount you may think proper. You will very easily perceive what a wide door this would open to fraud and corruption and favoritism on one hand, and for robbing the people on the other." Is that America of today? Sad to say, Davy Crockett must have come to the future, written his pamphlet, and returned to his own time. But you see, he also had the answer right in there, too. Right in that first sentence. The power of collecting and dispersing money at pleasure is the most dangerous power that can be entrusted to men under a system of revenue by tariff. The answer is, don't do that! And that is one of the key points of my book. What we should do is we should separate society and state. Just as we separated government and state, we should also separate economy and state and everything else from the state. But we need to separate society and state and make it the independent organization that it once was. The situation that I profess in my book is that we take a new eleemosynary organization, I call it society. I take the United States Constitution as the model. It's an excellent framework. So society has its president, its Congress, and its courts. But the main difference between society and the state is that society does not have the coercive power of taxation. Any money that goes to society has to be contributed. And then with the money they get, they budget it and they help the needy as best they can. What that does is that cuts off that ability for them to keep raising our taxes, raising our taxes, raising our debt. Better yet, it gives an alternative method for addressing the welfare state, because we can continue to be the kind-hearted people we Americans are, but we do it at our own expense instead of a government expense. There's a crash coming, a huge crash, because this welfare state is not going away. Nobody's addressing it. Sequestrations and little budget cuts and eliminating one little piece of NASA or Amtrak or something like that, it's not going to do it. What we need to do now is to start forming societies. A national society to slowly replace Social Security and welfare. A state society to slowly replace how Medicaid is done, PACE program, and things like that. A society for your town to take care of keeping the traffic lights turned on, keeping the streets clean, taking care of your local people who are ill. We need to create our own societies, a voluntary organization, contribution voluntarily given. Because if we don't do that now, while we still have a chance, while there's still time, there's a crash coming. I have 3 daughters, my wife and I, 2 grandchildren. What are we going to be leaving them? The time has come for us to separate society and state while we have the time to do it leisurely before the crash comes and we're forced to do it. Thank you very much for your attention. Atlas Snubbed. I'll be right outside the door at the bottom of the steps. I'll be there for the rest of the evening. If you want to have any questions about the book, want to take a look at it, if you want to pick up a copy, the regular version, director's cut, e-version, printed version, whatever you like. Thank you again. Lou?
Thank you, Ken.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for the chance.
Well, Louis, you promised an education here, and that's what we're delivering here.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we're going to keep rolling with that education.